ordinance number 2005-04-054, and ordinance amending Urbana Local Traffic Code Section 23-274 regarding vehicles parked in temporary no parking zones. Mr. Gray?
Thank you. This is an item that before Mr. Holtz was to leave was on his to-do list, and it's kind of a cleanup item. But some time ago, back in 2001, we were looking for some guidance and help with how to deal with maintenance type activities where we have parking on the streets, and we'd come up with a plan and changed our traffic code accordingly. But one aspect of violators that are parking in excess of 72 consecutive hours is the issue of if we tow a vehicle, and if the vehicle is to be towed, is it at owner's expense or at someone else's expense? And we believe it was the intention that it would be at the violator's expense, and that language is not specifically mentioned in our traffic code here, and hence the reason to include that in here. And in last fall's leaf sweeping activities, we happened to have one person's car that was towed, and took the effort to read thoroughly through our codes and asked what gives us the authority to charge me, and didn't say so, and they were right. So we need to add that inclusion. So essentially there are a few other changes to the language. We include in the packet an example of the existing traffic code 23-274, and we did a markup underline of the additions and changes. But I think the key is the very last sentence of the last paragraph, and such towing and impoundment shall be at the vehicle owner's expense. The other changes are more or less the way that we inform the public of when we have activities, whether it's tree trimming, leaf sweeping, sewer work, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the real intent for the change here.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? If not, a motion would be in order.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Hayes.
I would second that.
Second by Mr. Roberts. Is there discussion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of sending this to council with a recommendation for approval, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. Next item is item number 6, resolution number 2005-04-007R, a resolution approving the City of Urbana and Champaign-Urbana, Champaign County Home Consortium fiscal year 2005-2006 annual action plan and fiscal year 2005-2009 consolidated plan. Mr. Gruey.
Right. You have copies of these two draft documents. We've noted that these are due May 15th. The more functional date is May 12th for these to go to HUD. The consolidated plan, if you will, 5-year plan, it's designed to serve as a guide or a framework for future annual action plans. One of the things we did this year was we separated the two. The last consolidated plan we did had one of the action plans built in, and we thought it'd be nice to keep them separate for reference sake. Another thing to consider, I think that was mentioned earlier in regard to the comprehensive plan, is that these documents can be amended. We oftentimes do amend our annual action plans. The same can be done with the consolidated plan. The annual action plan, I think, is more specific in terms of the budgets that are contained in there for our CDBG and home funding. The Community Development Commission reviewed a few versions of drafts of this annual action plan. And at the last meeting, March 23rd, we made a few minor changes that are noted in bullet points on the top of 3 regarding the HMIS, Homeless Management Information System, and the CHOTO home funding, the 15% set aside. We also conducted public hearings on both documents, and all that is included in the document. I know 3 bullet points that on page 3 that were, I think, more substantial. Mr. John Lee Johnson noted he was concerned about involvement of lenders. Pace came forward with concerns about continuing to address the concerns of disabled persons, and the Commission noted concerns about expanding the target area and adding 4 new block groups. That's the very quick review, if you will. Be able to answer questions.
Are there questions for staff? Ms. Pat.
These are questions on the annual action plan? Now, is that what we're...
This is
I mean,
on,
the two are together,
Right.
an agenda item, but...
as
doing one at
as you
a
would
time?
like.
Okay. I'd like to do them one at a time.
Okay.
Well, about the annual action plan, and I emailed around about this. We're proposing under new funding activities, $53,000 for code enforcement. And I'm wondering what is contemplated above and beyond what we already do in the area of code enforcement.
Well, I think our thinking was to be able to simply possibly do more, or what do I want to say, a more comprehensive approach, more resources, if you will. We really haven't thought through in terms of the staffing long term, but it was an issue that we thought code enforcement would be a viable mechanism to address some of the neighborhood issues, particularly some of the multifamily units that were of concern. And it's we've seen it done, CDBG funding used for this activity in a lot of our neighboring entitlement communities in central Illinois. So we thought it was an activity, it's eligible activity, and it might help.
Okay. I don't want to get in debate, but I look at this and what I see is that we're using CDBG money to pick up an operating cost that should be paid for out of general revenue. Because, and I don't know how you do more code enforcement. If we're doing systematic inspection of multifamily housing, then that's something that we're already doing, or should be already doing. And if we find violations, whether in response to complaints or systematic inspection, then we have our enforcement mechanism. So what else would we do beside that this money would be paying for?
Well, I guess I can't really put my finger on it. I guess we just figured that it was a necessity, or we thought more funding would create opportunities for us to do it better.
Yeah, I think I'll save the rest for debate. And then I will just make one comment. I sent this to you, the memo. I don't think I need to make a motion, but on page 10 it says Urbana Township when it was supposed to say Cunningham Township. So if someone, I assume that's a typo and that needs to be corrected. That's all I have.
Further questions, Mr. Alex?
Just to follow up to Ms. Pat's question, would that additional code enforcement be specific to the CDBG target area, or would that be citywide?
It would be focused more on the target area, is the CDBG regulations ask that you do your code enforcement in areas where you plan to make investments.
So the argument is, in effect, that we would be improving the quality of the specific communities identified as target area by doing code enforcement above and beyond that, which we'd normally do pretty much equally across all areas citywide.
Yes.
Ms. Beck?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. Is the reason for extending the community development block grant area, target area, specifically for this item, or are there other reasons for wanting to include the additional census tract?
I think it was other considerations, other concerns about the dynamics of these neighborhoods that showed some deterioration, if you will, crime activity and those sorts of things. And the thinking was simply that by including them into the target area, there could be resources may be available to address those concerns.
So, for example, funds for clearance of slum and blighted conditions could be applied in that addition. I forget what it is now. It's 58? No, what number? No, 58. 56. It could also be spent in 56, so that, or that what else is there here? Not a whole lot, I guess. That the Urbana senior repair, that could also be in 56.
Certainly.
Okay, and then that was the general idea, was for all the types of things that we're doing in the other census tracts to be able to do that in this additional one too, right? Everybody's nodding. And I guess maybe just a little more follow-up. I don't know, maybe the mayor wants to answer this. Obviously, the concern which was expressed at the Community Development Commission meeting was that means less money for the existing areas because we're diluting these scarce funds. And I'm wondering I shouldn't ask how you feel about it, but Mayor Satterthwaite, would you care to address that, the
Yeah, I
vision here?
think that, we've recognized that some areas of Urbana have changed over the years, and particularly in this census block, and not the whole thing, but there are some significant areas that are becoming deteriorated, and where we've seen a lot of shifts. What had been, maybe 15 years ago, the majority of owner-occupied housing is becoming rental, and that there's not the attention paid to the quality of the housing stock in certain areas that there had been over past years. And it's a recognition that, these houses that were built probably in the 60s maybe are getting to an age where if they're not attended to by the owners and some of the owners may be getting elderly and so forth, that these houses will continue to deteriorate unless there's some city programs that are eligible for, the house fix-ups and the emergency fix-ups, senior assistance, and so forth. And so rather than continuing to let the area degrade, where we'd have to put significant resources into it later on, we felt like there would be, an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure. If we can get to it now before it really deteriorates badly, then it would be money very well spent and keeping the neighborhood in good condition. And we've had requests from residents throughout the city to include their area in the past, and I think this is the first time that we're recommending that the CDBG area be expanded, well, the entire time I've been in office, and probably longer than that, so probably at least 15 years.
One more question. Do we have to add census tracts as opposed to, I don't know what these are called because I know they're bigger than census blocks, but each census tract is divided into something that's numbered.
Block group.
Groups.
What are they?
Block groups.
Block groups, thank you, that's the word. Is it possible to add some block groups and not others, or do we need to? Okay, because I'm just looking at the income distribution. Actually, I was looking in Census Tract 55 too. I guess I never looked at this before. That the block groups 4 and 5 actually
Page
have.
on there, I saw that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
7.
Page. Oh,
There's 7 in this.
7 of. Oh, it's the 7.
Consolidated plan.
Page 39
Annual action.
It's page 4 of the 5-year plan, and it's page. What did you say? 7 of.
7 of the annual
Yeah,
action.
page 7 of the annual action plan, thank you, has, if you look in Census Tract 55, block groups 4 and 5 have less than 50%, I don't know if it's household or population, but low to moderate income, as opposed to block group 1 that has 91.9%. And actually, 56, there's not that much difference among the 4 of them, but numbers 1 and 4 have a higher percentage than 2 and 3. So I was just wondering if there's room for that, and there is room for taking some. I'm not saying it. I'm just wondering, could we? Yeah.
Yes, and I believe the history has been at least to make a boundary that's manageable, so it's not awkward
Yeah.
with their neighbors in and they're not, and across the street.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay,
Well,
thank you.
Just to comment on that, I know just from looking at 1, 2, and 3 and 56 that there are specific neighborhoods in all 3 of those that would probably be good targets for CDBG funding. Now, Block 4 is probably one that, might not need to be included, but I know of specific areas in 1, 2, and 3 that would definitely be helped by being in the target area. Now, that's not to say that all of it should be, or even the majority, but I know that there are pockets within each one of those that are seeing some deterioration and could use a little lift.
Thank you.
Are there further questions for staff on the annual action plan? I just have a couple then.
Yeah, just have one
Oh,
question.
Mr. Hayes.
The amounts of money spent on community development is one amount, and then you decide where the money's going to be spent. Is that right?
You mean the money coming in for the CDBG?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you take a look at the annual action plan, what page is that? Here, 15 of 40 on the, then it shows the amount of money coming in this year. That's 15 of 40? Yeah. That shows the grant amount that's coming in this year, 2005-2006 grant of $535,000. And then recapture funds this year of 132, and Bob, that's from loans that have come back into the...
Right, some program income, some just funds that weren't spent out, different rehab programs that didn't go to their full budget.
And then that $510,000 would be money that we received in previous years that's been allocated and has not yet been spent.
I don't have a complaint at this time, but I do have a concern. If you remember back in the 90s, Ward 3 was considered low income, second-class citizens, and you name it. You know, we were on the bottom rung of the totem pole when it came to how much were we really appreciated in the city of Urbana. And then, you know, at that time, the police department was understaffed, and they wanted to, you know, use money from the community development fund to hire, you know, several police officers to bring them up to staff. Well, we were fortunate at that time that the council was willing to say that, you know, the city really needed police officers, and what they need to do is put them in the budget. Okay, and at that time it was felt like community policing was the way to go, and it was. And so consequently, as a result of you know, the city making sure that the police officers, you know, came out of the city budget, that even though they progressed to cut back on a lot of the problems that used to exist in Northwest Urbana, and what they were able to do is take these same policies of community policing and take them to other parts of the city, because you know, in reference to what what the mayor said, there's other parts of the city that's starting to deteriorate. You got more crimes and everything that's going on in Northwest Atlanta. But the reason why I'm bringing this all to your attention is that, you know, through the years, regardless of how well Northwest Urbana is doing, that most people feel that Northwest Urbana will never be as equal as the rest of the community. You know, I mean, you don't say that, but, you know, let's face reality, okay? And so what I'm also saying is that we don't continue to take community block grant monies to foster and perpetuate other neighborhoods across the country, I mean, across the city. You know, without making sure that, you know, the people that the community block grant money was meant for get their fair share first before you distribute it across the rest of the city.
Mm-hmm. Are there further questions for staff on the annual action plan? I have just a couple. Starting with page 3 of 40 on the annual action plan, among the bullet points include provide funding for street and sidewalk improvements in targeted neighborhoods, and the last bullet point, provide funding for code enforcement and clearance of health and safety concerns. Mr. Gruy, is there any reason why the city could not pay for those or out of the CIP or general revenues?
Well, as I understand that our demolition line item, if you will, in our building safety is always very challenged. And so this would give added resources, and it might be addressing things that maybe aren't in the purview of a demolition. In other words, there might be other slighted or blighted things, much like we discussed at staff level. Popular things were a shed-away program, where it was a structure that maybe wasn't a house, but an accessory building that we could get rid of and help a neighborhood.
But these are items that could be, if necessary, also paid for out of either the CIP or general revenue. And there's nothing that would prohibit the general revenue if the
No, I
funds
guess-
were set aside.
I
Right.
suspect not. You're right, sure.
Okay. And Mr. Gray looks like he's also able to answer a question, I presume, on the CIP issue.
Yeah.
Okay?
There is no, if CIP was to pay for these projects, then it means it's reprioritizing some other projects, okay, and deferring, what have you. If you look through the years, these funds have redeveloped, reconstructed many streets in Eads and Harvey and Gregory, north and south of King Park, Sunset Street this year, expensive projects, big projects. Typically, streets like that do not get upgraded without a special assessment or direct public participation. But these funds have allowed that sort of thing to happen. If you look at our CIP, our city council policies are 100% funding by the city for collector arterial streets, for example. But when you get to local streets, like in Eads, Harvey, or Gregory, there's a public benefit of such and such percent, but there's also a local contribution. That hasn't occurred in these areas. So to say CIP would pay for that would mean that we'd be asking for residents to pay so much money a year over a certain period of time to fund it, and that hasn't been the case. So this funding has been very instrumental in upgrading streets that need to be upgraded in these block grant areas. So just keep in mind, the CIP is finite dollars, and sure, could a street be done? Perhaps, but it means something else wouldn't get done. And secondly, and maybe more in a difficult situation, would be asking adjacent property owners to help pay for an improved street, which is tough to do.
Okay, thank you. I have a follow-up question regarding, on page 18 of 40, number 3, code enforcement, with which Ms. Pat and Mr. Alex had already discussed. How much does the city currently spend on code enforcement? Dr. Tyler's got an answer for that? No. Or
I don't have a budget with me, but I know that we have one housing inspector, so figure maybe $60,000 and some portion of clerical staff. So CDBG, we do some demolition, but it's not significant.
Right.
We have some demolition costs in general funds. So I would have to look at it, but it'd be 60,000, maybe 8,000 in demolition. Legal, city attorney spends time on code enforcement, some proportion of their time. So,
And Ms. Pat has a follow-up.
We have only one housing inspector, but we do have the electrical inspector and the...
She's talking for everything but new construction. She's not
Right,
including-
but they don't, but their activity is not limited to new construction.
Right.
When the housing inspector on the systematic inspection or in response to complaint finds concerns about electrical, the electrical inspector comes out.
Yeah.
And there are maybe other staff also who are involved in that.
well, for
Existing
remodels, the
properties.
building inspector would come out. Depends on the complaint. We have electrical inspector, plumbing mechanical inspector, but the main staff is a housing inspector
Right.
for all existing housing. And
But
so-
I think, I'm not sure what Ms. Wyman's, what was behind your question, but just if we're talking about how much money do we spend on code enforcement overall, I think it goes beyond the salary of just the one housing inspector and clerical support. It's, I don't know how you figured exactly, but some portion of
Yeah.
the salaries of several other inspectors and of the legal staff, because that's all part of enforcement,
Environmental officer.
you know?
Okay, But I think it's fair to say that their primary duties lie mostly in other areas. It's a small percentage of, like, new construction is really mostly what the other inspectors do. If we were not as busy construction-wise, then they'd have more time to spend on existing. So,
Okay, thank you. I have just one other question. and I think Mr. Gruy can answer this. It's on page 27 of 40, item number 3, regarding unprogrammed CHOTO funds. From previous fiscal years, we've got $38,970. Is this part of, or what could be used as one of the United Citizens and Neighbors rehab housing projects? I know that council has discussed this, or when we took it out of the annual action plan amendments for a couple weeks ago, I think, we talked about making sure that there were funds, or that this is a project that we would like to support in the future. Is this something that could be used towards such a rehab project?
If you can elected to pursue their CHOTO status, that's possible.
Okay.
They haven't fulfilled that or gone down that path yet, but should they? The funds are for those special CHOTOs organizations.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Does anyone have, Ms. Chenoweth, you've got further questions?
Yeah, just two follow-up questions, Ms. Wyman's questions, actually. The question about the code enforcement, I got lost in the conversation. I think I just want to ask the direct question. Does the $53,000 go to pay the salary of the one housing inspector? Is that where that money would go to?
It would go toward expenses associated with the code enforcement, and that might be salary, et cetera.
How much of the $53,000 will go towards the salary of the housing inspector that serves the entire city?
Well, I guess we really haven't put the meat on all the expenses yet. We simply wanted to get the budget item in place and see what other related expenses there might be, but salary would be one of those.
I think the question is it the intent to fund existing services that are happening right now with this $53,000, or would the $53,000 all be over and above what we have now? And so if it's over and above what we have now, then it wouldn't fund any of the salary of the existing inspector. So what was the proposal?
Yeah, well, again, I think we've identified the need for this, and we've only got so many bodies there, if you will, doing it. We have talked about, might there be opportunities to procure other resources, other, if you will, staff to do this kind of work, and there again, you'd be reimbursing somebody else or another individual. But we just haven't worked out all the details. We just know that we want to pursue more code enforcement at a higher level in these areas of concern.
The idea is not to subsidize the ongoing operations of the city as they exist right now.
No, I mean that's not the idea. We want to go beyond that, of course.
Right. So this would be if there's any code if this money is used, it would be for hiring an additional code enforcement person, full or part-time, or contracting out code enforcement or something like that.
Something to that effect.
Since our housing inspector's already working.
Exactly. They've been taxed. They're at their limit for some time, considering all the new development and no growth in their staff.
Okay, that's helpful, and perhaps we could clarify that in the language of that under code enforcement. Just before we get to that, I have another question, which is going back to actually the page Ms. Wyman was on, page 3. I guess this is for Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray, I believe, would be the person to answer this question. Let's see. Has there been improvements to streets in the targeted areas that did not come from CDBG funds, say, in the last 4 years?
Well,
Or has it always come from CDBG funds?
Oh, no. Goodwin Avenue right now is not CDBG monies.
Okay.
And we rebuilt Goodwin Avenue by King's School, and it was out of CIP money, for example. Not to be confused with the bike path that's being built now, which is a federal-funded project. But no, we've improved streets, and especially with resurfacing and that sort of work, motor fuel tax monies have been used. But usually, my example earlier has to do with a chip and seal street reconstructed into a concrete street. We've used CDBG monies.
Okay.
In the past, we've also had, maybe not in the last 4 years, but when we had, when economic times were good and we had some good surpluses, we dedicated some money from put additional money into CIP for what we call the neighborhood street program, and we did a number. Now, generally, those weren't entire reconstructions, but putting curb and gutter in the block grant areas with general funds, usually asphalt rather than concrete streets, and curb and gutter where there was minimal need or no need for sewer improvements. It was all surface flow rather than underground stormwater improvements. So relative, we're trying to cherry pick some of the ones that were easiest to do at the lowest cost and still get be effective in improving the neighborhood. So it hasn't been just CDBG money. Over the history of over the last years, there's been general fund money that's been put into that as well.
So just a follow-up question, then would it be accurate on page 3 to actually say, provide funding which augments general revenue funds for code enforcement and clearance of health and safety, and provide funding which augments general revenue funds for street and sidewalk improvements in targeted neighborhoods? So that it's clear that it's actually an augmentation of funds in these areas, and it's not just, we use CDBG funds to fund stuff in this area, and we use other funds to fund stuff in other areas, and I think that gets away from what CDBG funds are for, which is to augment areas that have greater need.
I think Ms. Pat and then Mr. Alex.
Are we in discussion now? Or are we
Oh, I
still
think
on
we're
your
still on questions on the
I don't
annual
have any
action
more
plan.
questions.
Mr. Alex?
I guess a way, maybe a more concise way to ask these couple follow-up questions would be typically when you have a specific earmark like this for something like code enforcement, is there or is there not a concomitant reduction in the code enforcement funds from the overall city budget for the general fund?
I don't believe so.
Okay, so this really truly isn't an increment above what would be typically
Right.
spent. Okay, thank you.
Any further questions on the annual action plan? Mr. Roberts?
I just had one about the sidewalk and repair. I was curious, and I guess really the mayor somewhat answered it, about installing curbs and gutters in neighborhoods that don't have such. And I know that in the East Urbana area, the gutters were installed, I don't know, it was like south of California or something, and people who are living north of that line are still wondering if they'll ever see them. And also, I had, of course, the interest in preservation of the sidewalks, the brick sidewalks. And I was just wondering if these additional funds are sort of earmarked for that particularly in your mind, or was that kind of project coming out of general funds? Because you have enough. You have
I want to see a CDBG from here.
Because it's my hope to address that on an annual basis.
Well, the sidewalk repair work is coming out of the capital improvement fund,
So that would be a different thing.
exclusive of these funds.
Okay.
Do it in the CIP.
Since it mentions it specifically, I was wondering about it.
Well, there are all kinds of things that would be CDBG eligible that we've paid for with CIP and general funds. The whole street lighting program was eligible. Some of it, a small portion, was paid for by CDBG funds, but the vast majority of it was paid for with general city general revenues. And so the sidewalk money, the neighborhood street program, all these are examples where we put general fund money into neighborhood improvements
And another
in the
fund,
CDBG area.
another fund we use too for those areas eligible in the TIF 3 area too. So for street and sidewalk improvements. So.
Ms. Pat?
I move to extend time 30 minutes.
Motion by Ms. Pat, second by Mr. Hayes. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, same sign. Any further questions on the annual action plan? I think procedurally, the next thing to do then is to move the annual action plan to council, and then we'll take amendments. Ms. Pat?
Move to send the annual action plan to City Council with the recommendation for approval.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Pat, second by Ms. Chenoweth. Is there any discussion? Ms. Pat?
On the subject of code enforcement, you can put in words to make it sound better, but this is about specifically something I've heard Ms. Chenoweth express disagreement with about our policy. This is about using community development block grant funds to hire another housing inspector. It's, which is not necessarily a wrong thing. The only thing really wrong with it is that we don't have enough money to do so many things, and there are certain things like, for example, attempting to address the serious problem of homelessness and housing instability among low-income people with our affordable housing programs. It's just, I mean, if it doesn't come out of the CDBG or the home budget, it just doesn't happen, because that's, I don't know where, God in heaven gave this edict, but somehow that's the deal, is that nothing for housing for poor people can come out of general revenue. But things that can be paid for out of general revenue can come out of CDBG, actually more so, really CDBG, not home. And so, and that's what we have with the streets, and that's what we have with number of things over the years, and that's what this is. I'm all for hiring another housing inspector. I mean, I know we need one. I've been saying it for years, and I'm not going to be here as far as approval of the next budget, and Lord knows money's tight, so gee, maybe we should just do this. But there isn't. No more programming is going to happen. I mean, I shouldn't say no more is going to happen. Maybe more things will happen, but this isn't a special plan. This is a plan to use community development block grant money to hire another inspector. And that inspector presumably would do, I mean, the CDBG area is made big enough that that inspector could do the systematic inspections of all the multifamily housing in the CDBG target areas. But that's not a new program. That's something that we're allegedly doing anyway. And that's a problem I have with that particular expenditure. And when I look at, if you turn to page 22, look at the 3 bullet points under A1, donation to nonprofit housing developers for new housing construction, city-sponsored rehabilitation and resale to qualified home buyers, donation to other organizations. Well, actually, I guess that's the third one. But those 2 bullet points, those are two things we always need more money for, and we do have some money here from carrying over from the previous year. Even actually, if you look at on pages 18 and 19, we're looking at the proposed budget, clearance of slum and blighted conditions, $35,000. I mean, any of those might be, or any of those are needs that are not sufficiently funded with these limited funds now, and might be a better place to spend that $53,000. But I'm not going to go to the wall over not using CDBG money to hire another housing inspector. I just think that there should be no illusion that we're doing anything other than using community development block grant funds to hire another housing inspector whose activities will be the program that is now underway of systematic inspection, and that presumably, that could be funded out of general revenue. It's just a matter of whether we have enough money to hire another inspector if we weren't to use the CDBG money. If people are okay with that, that's fine. But if people aren't okay with that, then I think we should change it.
Is there further discussion, Ms. Pat, on that?
Well, I'm curious what others have to say about that.
Ms. Chenoweth, and then Mr. Alex.
I'd like to move to amend page 3 of the annual action plan, 40-page document, so that the last and fourth to last bullet point say provide funding to augment general revenue funds for street and sidewalk improvements in targeted neighborhoods, and provide funding to augment general revenue funds for code enforcement and clearance of health and safety concerns.
It's a motion by Ms. Chenoweth. Is there a second? I'll second for purpose of discussion. Ms. Chenoweth, do you want to speak to the motion?
I think I've already spoken to it, which is basically that it has concerned me for 4 years now, and it will continue to concern me to and because I don't have hard data, I mean, it sounds like we do things in targeted areas with general revenue funds. I don't know to what extent, and I'm concerned that when times are tight, we take money out of poor neighborhoods. And we do that, it's not that we do that directly, we do it indirectly by funding needs in these poor neighborhoods with CDBG funds. So, as much as it matters, I want to make it clear in the executive summary that this funding is to augment general revenue funds for these things and is not meant as a substitution of those things.
Is there further discussion on the proposed amendment? Mr. Alex?
I think I'll support that. I think I know that there's in any community where we have sharing of resources, and we have to ask, what percentage of time is the building inspector inspecting homes in the target area versus homes in the non-target area and so forth. So I don't think it's reasonable to expect that we account for every, dime that offsets from the general fund or from the CDBG funds. But I think there's a reasonable expectation, and we have a reasonable obligation to use CDBG funding to benefit the CDBG target areas, and not simply sort of play a shell game where we're saying, well, we'll just take this money out of CDBG and then we can take what we're going to spend in these areas and use it to go in other directions. So I think the amendment's appropriate. I'm not sure the comment that, to the extent that this goes to hire an extra housing inspector, I guess I don't have a problem with hiring an extra housing inspector, as long as the intent is that the level of housing inspections across citywide would continue to be the same. In other words, the portion of the current budget that's being spent on housing inspection out of the general fund in the target areas would remain the same, and then these additional CDBG funds would be used to fund additional inspections in the target area. In other words, I think I think housing inspection is a perfectly valid use of CDBG funds, because in effect what you're saying is that, look, we have these programs to rehabilitate homes in these areas. We have these programs to encourage, the maintenance and the clearance of these structures if they do become so dilapidated as to be useless, and to encourage redevelopment of those. That it may well be the most cost-effective way to use these funds to try to catch this problem early and do more inspections of these properties and attempt to help keep these properties in top condition, as opposed to letting them deteriorate, then having to pay to clear the property, pay to maintain the property, give the property away to a CHOTO or a housing development organization, then pay them to build a house on it. I mean, clearly, if we can retain the house that's there now through better inspection, I think that's great. So I'm not opposed to the proposed use of the funds, but I would expect that the change that we would see here would be an extra, whatever it is, what's the dollar amount?
$53,000.
An extra $53,000 for the housing inspections being done in the target area, not just doing it with this money so that we can take the housing inspector's time and send them to the non-target areas.
Mr. Roberts and then Ms. Pat.
Well, I'm not all as enthralled with funding extra housing inspection. It seems like if it's going to take money from a potential rehabilitation, I'd rather pay for paint or plywood or shingles or something like that than for a person's salary. If we already have a housing inspection staff on, whether they can get to everybody that they should, that's a question that has to be answered by staff. But I'm not sure. I think the more you can give into people's hands to actually do the project, the better you are. And so I'm not as fond of doing extra funding, siphoning off money to for what basically administrative fees. That's my point.
Ms. Pat?
I'll support the motion because I agree with it. Then I'm going to make a motion to take code enforcement out of the CDBG budget, because that would be contrary to the motion that we're passing right now. Pass it.
Further discussion on the motion, Mayor Satterthwaite.
Well, I agree that the wording change that Ms. Chenoweth has offered makes sense, and I support that. But and generally, I like to see our money going into more the shingles and furnaces and so forth as well. And, the thing that troubles me about this $53,000 is it's so undefined right now. We really don't know what it is. But I could see it being very useful in that if we use the $53,000 for a code enforcement officer that is requiring, rental property owners, homeowners to fix up their homes and generating a lot more rehab through enforcement rather than just paying for the shingles and furnaces and concrete and so forth. So I see where you could really use this money, if it's done effectively, in a way to get more investment in the housing stock in the community development block grant areas, if it's done right. I mean, it's not supposed to just be punitive and say, oh, we're going to fine you. We want the problem to be taken care of. And if somebody's taking care of their home, in code enforcement, they're more likely to fix up and do the rest of the maintenance as well. And so it could generate a lot more rehab and repair of the homes than simply spending the $53,000 on a couple of whole house rehabs. You know, I don't feel strongly about it one way or another, but and clearly the problem with this code enforcement as it stands right now is that it's not very well defined, and we don't have specific guidelines for how the money is going to be used.
Is there further discussion on the on Ms. Chenoweth's motion? I'll just make a quick comment then on this proposed amendment. I supported, my concern with all of these items, with the items that have been brought up, is just, I think, follows the concerns that Mr. Hayes and other council members have brought up, and that is that this, the CDBG and home funds, I guess especially the CDBG, goes to the targeted area, much of which Mr. Hayes represents, some of which Mr. Roberts represents, but I'm concerned about the idea of just substituting what should be paid for out of general revenues or the CIP with CDBG just because we can. And so then you get an even amount that's being spent throughout the city rather than what I think should happen, which is we've got the CDBG funds, we've got the home funds, there should be an extra amount spent on the targeted areas. That's why they're targeted, because they need, there is more of a need in that area than in the rest of the city. And so that's my concern, again, and I think other council members have also expressed this, about the use of money for code enforcement, for streets, for sidewalks, and whether that's actually going to go in addition to what would otherwise be spent or spread out throughout the city, or whether that's going as a substitution. And that's the concern I have, not only with the code enforcement again, but with the other items as well. I know we've discussed this in months and years past, especially as it related to redevelopment of Lakeside Terrace and the funds that were being used or targeted there from the city. Further discussion on Ms. Chenoweth's motion, motion to amend. Then all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That passes. Further discussion or amendments to the annual action plan. Ms. Pat.
Thank you. I move to, this on page 18, to eliminate the code $53,000 for code enforcement and to reprogram that money for property acquisition in support of new construction. Can we make one line? Actually, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Mr. Green, can we make new construction or rehab? Can we make that one topic, or does that have to be two different ones in terms of I mean, it's listed under housing rehab activities on the carryover, but I noticed it says, it just says new construction, and then down here it says rehab.
Right.
But I want to make clear
The concept is more property acquisition. That's
but
what
it's
that-
property acquisition for new construction or
Right.
rehab. Okay, that, I'm sorry. Motion is to remove code enforcement for item 3 here and change that expenditure for $53,000 for property acquisition for rehab or new construction.
There's a motion by Ms. Pat. Is there a second?
I would second that.
Second by Mr. Roberts. Ms. Pat, would you like to speak to the motion?
I think I already have.
Okay. Is there further discussion, Ms. Chenoweth?
My concern, and I think it might be concern of the next council and mayor, is that we adequately do code enforcement in our city, and this has been something that's come up over and over again. Perhaps I'm inclined to support this with the caveat that we figure out how to pay for code enforcement in a different way. It's not that I don't want code enforcement. In fact, I think that one of our, we've been growing as a city in terms of number of homes. Our houses have deteriorated just because they're aging, and I think we haven't added code enforcement personnel. We've kind of kept it as is. And so definitely there's a squeeze there, and I think that our community development office has felt that squeeze, and I think we've seen some of the consequences of not being able to get around to doing adequate code enforcement in our community. So I'm inclined to support this and to, as the surviving council member on the on this body. Oh, there's 2 surviving council members on the body to push for for us to consider a different way in which to pay for code enforcement in the future.
Ms. Pat?
Sorry, I will speak to the motion.
Sorry, I didn't-
I agree 100%. I think we need another housing inspector. There's no question about it. Why I think it's wrong to have it in here is that we have systematic inspection of multifamily housing and response to resident complaints about code violations in my neighborhood. In fact, there's probably more attention in my neighborhood than in lots of other parts of town. And we don't use federal dollars that could be that are for special programs to pay for it in my neighborhood. We use general revenue to pay for code enforcement in my neighborhood, and we should be using general revenue to pay for code enforcement in all the neighborhoods, because there are other special needs in those neighborhoods that are the reason we get the community development block grant funds, and we should be using the CDBG monies for those purposes.
Further discussion, Mr. Alex?
I oppose the amendment because I think the more I think about it, the more I would like to see increased code enforcement as a priority in the CDBG areas. And if this is just a shell game, a way to basically hire another housing inspector who's going to work citywide,
then I'd oppose it. But I think I'd support the amendment. But I think if in fact what staff is saying is that this is a effort that will be dedicated within the CDBG areas, I think that's probably something that we want to do. I think one of the concerns we have with these CDBG funds and specifically the rehab programs is intake. And we send out flyers and we let people know that these programs are available. But the things that I hear, and none of my ward is in the CDBG target area, but we have a small part of the ward that probably should be. And I get complaints from people saying, hey, how do I make my neighbor clean up their lawn? Or how do I've got a property next to me or an apartment building next to me that's not being kept up, and what can I do about this? And well, the answer is, you can maintain your property and you can apply for rehab funds and you can, keep your property up. But if your neighbor is not, then the neighborhood is going to deteriorate and your property values are going to fall, and the dynamic in the neighborhood is going to continue to change for the worse. So I think code enforcement probably should go hand in hand with opportunities to remedy the problems through rehab. So I would actually think code enforcement would be a pretty good use of these funds and probably a pretty effective way to catch problems early, as staff has suggested, prior to structures requiring major rehabs or demolition and reconstruction of a new house on the same lot. So I would oppose the amendment.
Mr. Roberts?
Well, so in my area, from what I've observed walking through it and talking to people as they open their doors and looking inside their homes, yes, they'll be cited for having bad gutters and a falling down porch. And the next thing, the only way it's ever going to be solved is if they are encouraged to do a senior repair service, a grant or something, because they're not going. These people don't have the cash in their pockets to go out and fix their houses like they do on Nevada Street. And so you're kind of like, yes, you're gonna set a lot of people, but will they be able to actually do anything about it in any kind of without incurring hardship, financial hardship, or I think it's probably going to be more useful to have the money in the repair programs than in the penalty citing programs.
Ms. Pratt?
A question for Mr. Roberts. Do you think that would be a better place to put the $53,000 under senior repair rather than property acquisition? I admit my mind was wandering elsewhere, but as far as where I want to see this go, but I agree with you. I think you made it
probably somewhere, and I don't have the facts to about I'm not wise enough to tell you where the money would best be employed for the community, but it strikes me, it catches my eye.
Ms. Pratt?
I have a question for Mr. Gruey. Do we receive more requests than we can fund for the senior repair program?
The staff has always been good at massaging that and basically spending out what we have. So I think if there's more resources, there's a likelihood that they could spend it. But we've never really tapped out. But it's sort of a dance we've learned.
So there's
over
no
time.
waiting list?
No, not that we haven't been able to fill.
Oh, that's interesting, huh? Well, because it's my impression, if I recall correctly, that on the whole house rehab that we get a lot more applications than we could ever fund.
We do get a lot of applications, and it takes a long time, I guess, would be the thing. You're right, if we wanted to do them all in a year, the requests we got in a year, but we'll do them over multiple years, and that's what creates a long waiting list and that delay and unmet need, right.
Well, do you think, let me just put you on the spot here, maybe we could, and this isn't a final decision tonight, but do you think if we increase the money available for senior repair service, that money would be used?
I think if it was maybe Alice spread over the repair service, senior repair, in some prorated fashion, that the staff can utilize it.
We could be split maybe between a couple funds?
Actually, I would be, you seconded my motion. Did he second?
I believe
Yeah.
so.
I would like to change my motion with the seconder's permission to move that $53,000 to Urbana, to senior repair service.
Motion by Ms. Pat, or, amending her motion, Mr.
Yeah,
Roberts?
I would agree with that.
Okay. Mr. Hayes?
A few years
Which money?
A few years back, 3 years back, I think it was community development. I don't know where it was, but there was a program that people would list what kind of home repairs they needed for their homes, and they could get up to $2,500 to repair their homes without income limits. Whatever happened to that program?
Pardon me, I'm sorry, I was making a note. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes.
There was a program that was available to certain citizens,
Right.
where they could get up to $2,500 to, repair that.
Right.
And you had a committee of citizens who decided who would get it. I mean, what happened to that program?
I understand that was a special program in the Carl neighborhood where a sum of money was amassed from Carl and the city, and then they did create a rather innovative kind of a peer project where your neighbors decided on who should get what improvements. And I guess it's run its course and the funding's expired.
No, all I'm saying is, since we're talking about senior citizen repair, that maybe we can use some of this money to do those sorts of programs. I don't know, I just
Sure.
talking about that.
Right. Well, and that's a kind of, never mind. I'm not going to.
Ms. Chenoweth?
I would propose, based on the late hour and not wanting to program on the fly, because in looking at these, there are a lot of things like transitional housing for homeless families with children and public service activities that, since we're in committee, we could actually, a proposal for a friendly amendment, Ms. Pat, is that you cut code enforcement and that we not reprogram the 53,000, and that we spend some time hearing from staff and council members about where appropriate allocation would fall.
Ms. Pat, you accept
Yes.
that? Okay, and Mr. Roberts, you
Yes,
accept that?
I would go with that, too.
Mayor Satterthwaite, you have a comment?
Well, I just, a concern is that we've been close in the past to the spending guidelines from the feds, and if we allocate a big chunk of money, over $50,000, that's to be decided later, we can't spend it till later.
No, just
She
later
needs
this
next
week.
week, not later.
So you don't mean,
Spend the week discussing it.
so you don't mean just program it as,
No.
okay.
I'm sure we can use it, it's just a matter of where.
I apologize, it's the late hour and my brain's not working so well. That was originally, my intention was really just, let's try to do something else with this, but I had this notion I had to say where else it would go, but that's much more prudent. Thank you for the suggestion.
Well, just for information, remember, under public service, the transitional housing and neighborhood cleanups and so forth, that can't be, we can't allocate additional funds to those since the maximum is 15% and we're at the 15%.
Oh,
So
okay, well, that's useful
those
to know.
4 items under public service cannot receive an increase from this year's budget.
Are there further amendments or proposals to the annual action plan that council members wish to make tonight? Oh, sorry. Thank you. So the current motion is to take out the $53,000 from code enforcement listed under item 3, number 3 on page 18 of 40 of the annual action plan. Further discussion? Okay, all in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, same sign.
Nay.
Okay, that passes, and
And on that, you want staff to make a recommendation for next week's meeting on where that would go distributed.
Yeah, I think with maybe keeping in mind some of the comments here about, about wanting to put money into fixing housing up, paint.
Paint and shingles.
Paint. If there's some way paint can be included, I don't know if that's CDBG eligible activity, but I happen to agree with it. That is one of the big problems with the blight appearance that isn't actually about the structural integrity necessarily, but that people complain about all the time, and I'm sorry.
Let me just ask this question, since there was, the comment about CDBG funds being used in the target area. The senior repair service is citywide, and so if you want to target the funds to the target area, wouldn't necessarily be most effective in that particular thing. Now, if you add $10,000 to it, is it going to make that much of a difference? Probably not. But if you want the funds targeted to the CDBG area, then you might want to put the bulk of that money in there, but we can come up with some.
Okay.
Okay. Is there a motion to extend time past 11:30? If not, if there isn't, procedurally, I believe we would need to just ask if we would send the rest of the items to council is one way we could do it, and I know we've done that in the past.
Without recommendation, you mean?
Without a recommendation.
Or just discussion?
So I suppose with that, is there then, since I don't see a motion to extend time past 11:30, is there a motion to send the item 6, which is the resolution on the annual action plan and consolidated plan, item 7 regarding the Family Service of Champaign County project from this Community Development Block Grant Program Agreement, discussion of the 2005 private activity bond cap allocation, and item 9, discussion of the specialty sign policy for neighborhood signs, to council without a recommendation?
I would move that.
Okay, motion by Mr. Roberts, is there a second?
Just a point of procedure. Was there already a motion made with regard to item number 6?
It was a partial motion. It was a motion to, with regard to the resolution, with regard to the annual action plan for fiscal year 2005-2006, but not yet for the consolidated plan.
Is it in order to include that in a subsequent motion that sends that without a recommendation, or do we need to have closure on?
Well, I think what's being sent is it's already been changed to add that augmented in a couple places on page 3, and to take out the 53,000 and code enforcement program.
So it's being sent as amended, but without recommendation, in
Right.
fact?
That was my understanding. Mr. Roberts, is that what you intended?
Yeah, I think that what we've built so far, we shouldn't throw away.
Right. Okay. Mr. Alex, does that answer your procedural question?
Yes, it does, and I second.
Okay. So it's a motion by Mr. Roberts, a second by Mr. Alex. Discussion. Okay, seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That passes. These items will then show up at council next Monday, April 18th. Thank you. We're now adjourned.